This week on Jay of All Trades, I make the Gornisht roll. I am Jason Klom. I am a person who makes things. Most of those things are comedy things. This week is no exception. This is not in and of itself comedy, although it is playing the part of a piece of comedy. This is hard to explain. It's not that hard to explain. I have a podcast called Dan and Jay's Comedy Hour. I've been doing sketch comedy, improv comedy with my best friend Dan Gomiller since 1993. Now, we were both 13 at the time, so I understand what you're saying. Well, you weren't professionals then. Of course not. Well, we're barely professional now. We've been podcasting since 2014, and on that podcast there's a lot of world building, a lot of very dense comedic content that involves other universes, a lot to keep track of, stuff that we can barely ever keep track of.
Don't we all live on a sort of spectrum between cartoon and meat?
You know, that's not been suggested to me before this very moment, so I guess I don't know. I mean, I guess. But one of the things that comes up on the show frequently is that Dan and Jay's Comedy Hour, our comedy concern, is not just us, has not always been us. It goes back to the 1800s in the fantasy world of our sketch group. And since it goes back to at least the 1800s, part of that is the group we call Dan and Jay, Those Hilarious Two. Now, I decided recently that I wanted to play a bit with my 3D printer and make basically an Edison cylinder. If you don't know anything about Edison cylinders, long story short, it's the first widely available form of recorded audio that you could ever get. And they looked almost exactly like this, what you're seeing here. They didn't look as 3D printed, they didn't look as rough, but they did basically look like this. And they had the words on the end, and they did have channels cut in them. I've always wanted to make an actual comedy cylinder, something I still want to do, but I wanted to do a sketch where our distant relatives were on a cylinder. But I decided, in order to have a little bit of fun with it, that I would also make it from a fake company, the Gornisht roll. The fake company is Gornisht. This is the Gornisht roll. This is supposed to be a competitor with Edison that didn't fare very well for numerous reasons, which you will find out about in the podcast. I recommend you check out the podcast and check out the video I did that I'm talking to you about the making of right now. I'm not just talking about this, which is, pretty simple. So, but I will break down exactly how I made it. So long story short, I used a 123D design. It's free, and it was very simple, just getting the dimensions of your average cylinder. Now, you might be able to tell, since this is HD, that this is in 3 pieces, which means this is not the exact dimensions of an original cylinder. The inside of a cylinder actually is wider at this end than it is on this end to fit on the spindle and to make it easier to come off of the spindle, because what you do is put it on a spindle and put a little tracking needle that goes across like this, and they could hold about 2 minutes of audio. But I wanted this to be as legit as possible. I decided at some point I didn't care about these seams, and here's why. Because I have a 3D printer that is no longer supported. That company is no longer in business. It's the new Matter Mod T. It is not a bad 3D printer if you know how to tweak it. And I am still kind of learning how to tweak it. I've had it for a few years. I've made some interesting stuff, but it's taken a lot of trial and error, and that includes this. At some point, it would only print little rings that were about yay high, and I couldn't figure out why. Still haven't figured out why. So what I did was split the model that I made in two, to a top half and the bottom half. Top half printed out perfectly, exactly what I needed. Bottom half kept dying at about this spot. Fortunately, that's about halfway. I did the math. This is almost exactly the 4 inches, which is roughly, many of them are 4 inches long. So I was just like, screw it, I'm gonna glue it together. So I had what I needed there. Again, it's imperfect, but I don't care. It's a good prop, and it works for what it is. And Then eventually, and I did all this stuff out of order, but I'm going to try and do it in order for you. The name of this sketch, I apologize, it's not family friendly, is World's Colombian Sex Position. That's Dan and Jay, those hilarious too. This cylinder was supposed to, the history of it, the fake history is that it was presented at the Chicago World's Fair of 1893, or the World's Columbian Exposition. And I figured, lowest common denominator, that's the kind of dumb joke they would do. I put some packing tape around this, but laid it so that it would be perfectly flush. Just carefully, delicately let it touch itself, as it were. And then I trimmed around this edge, trimmed around the inside edge, and I had, a perfect circle that fit in here. Okay, so I did the tape, and then I put that tape on a piece of paper and cut out the circle that I needed. And then I wrote on it just to get a rough idea of how the letters should be positioned. Then I scanned this, and I turned it into a black and white scan. After I did that, I positioned it using a very old photoshopping program that is not called Photoshop. It's called Paint Shop Pro. It's what I'm used to making. Made a couple vector circles, and then I created a PNG file of the letters. I then imported those into my Cricut, and I cut those onto some vinyl. I decided at some point that I was not going to do detailed weeding of the vinyl, which meant all the little things in between, all the little holes in the O's and the P's and the F's. There's no holes in an F. The D's, etc. That I would just not include those. So I would treat this like a straight stencil. I painted acrylic white onto this, waited for it to dry, of course. Then I actually did not paint black over this. I took a Daiso $1.50 brush marker and just filled in everything very carefully. It's also okay if it looks rough, because this stuff all has to look aged, which is part of it. I'm just learning how to age stuff. But I then ran some, if I'm not mistaken, some orange and some yellow or some light orange crayons over this, just to give it a little bit of nasty age, probably some rust. Because the way the cylinder first makes its appearance in the video is, the joke is that since it's supposed to be made of plastic, which they weren't, this was experimental, that the sound had separated from the plastic, which I knew was just going to be some cooking oil and some dyed black water, which I let sit and poured it out of a different can, which I don't have here because it is literally covered in oil and I'm not touching it. We'll probably throw that one away. But I made a copy of this so that on the close-ups I could pour oil right out of this, and that's what I did. And that was simple. Then it gets reconstituted, and the way it is reconstituted is with an acentrifuge, which is a yarn winder that I attached to my 3D printer. Did I care if it tore my 3D printer apart? Not really. Not that I can afford to buy another one, but this thing is so half-assed, there's a chance it's just going to fall apart tomorrow. So I used that as my prop acentrifuge. My favorite part of this whole thing, though, was making the can. This is a coffee can. Fortunately, I had 2 or 3 of them in the house. The coffee, tea sometimes come in these. And you'll notice on the bottom, it's a little shinier than I would have liked it. It already had a little bit of scarring and aging on it, which is fine, which is good. But I didn't add enough to this as I would have liked to. Like I markered the inside of this so it wasn't too shiny, so it wasn't distractingly shiny for any close-ups if I needed them. And then I aged. There was some glue there, so I put some. I did run a lot of different colored Sharpies up and down this, and then this is just an inkjet print, which is the hardest part. I know how to age paper beforehand. Afterward, though, became a bit of a challenge. What I did is I took this, this is an old photo of somebody that I own. I just own a lot of old photos, so I scanned it. I don't like to use stuff that's already out there. It's more fun if you have never seen the face before, and it helps the joke land better. Gornisht, by the way, in case you don't know, is Yiddish for nothing. And I just thought it'd be funny. Plastinet Alumatine is also not a real product. Says World's Columbian Exposition. I did all this graphic design myself, including, and there's some text here. I tried to get as old-timey fonts as I possibly could. Printed it out, and then, like I say, I had to go and age this by hand afterwards. But what you're seeing here is mostly me running various orange and yellow and brown crayons over this. That is mostly what I did. My favorite part though is the rust stains, the very old rust stains, which are from some very nice German markers, watercolor markers that I just very delicately ran up and made them darker in some spots than others. And it kind of lends to the idea that maybe this thing was leaking, maybe this thing had been rusting for 100 years. This was a silver lid. This one is aged okay. It's not terrible. I like some of the pits and things. But I wanted it to mostly stay intact. But you can see there's a little bit of age. Same with this, I made sure not to glue this down entirely so that there are, it's coming off the thing. These are details you're never going to see, but they lend themselves to it. I scraped up bits and pieces. I think I scraped this off because I spelled alumitine differently here, but it lends to the age. This is a whole thing that I typed from scratch. And traditionally, these traditionally cylinders actually came in cardboard tubes. And some of them may even have had, I can't remember if any of them actually had asbestos in them, but I believe some of the cylinders may have had a little bit of asbestos because of what they're made of. But to sort of reference that, I put some paper tape in here and just scraped the crap out of it and then ran a bunch of markers over it so that this looks like cardboard. This is actually a piece of plastic, but I put a bunch of cardboard in it so that you couldn't see any plastic because it's supposed to be from 1893. Again, this part looks pretty good for 1893. There are a few other bits and pieces in the video that include the original Gornisht player, which is this. Now, I fully admit I did not build this from scratch. This is one of my wife's jewelry boxes. It's a beautiful old jewelry box. So it still has the, here we go, the fake spindle that I built. I was going to have a whole bit where I put it on the spindle and a whole machine I was going to build, and then realized there's no joke payoff to that other than, hey, look, he wasted his time to build that. So I figured it would be better just to have the spindle that comes out awkwardly and weirdly. And this is a roller. This is a lint, like a roller for cat hair or lint or whatever. I aged it and colored it a little bit and then put some gaff tape on it, which is already coming off, which is, it would have been good enough on the day, but I think you only see this much of it in the video. I can show you some of my reference photos that I used to make this. I have a lot. I've been waiting to do something like this for a long time. I'm really proud of this. It looks very good. I'm very happy with it. And I'm even happier with the very dumb joke that goes along with it. I guess the only other part is this background. A lot of them would have like nice floral designs or some beautiful, beautiful art. The background here, I just wanted it to look, I didn't want it to look entirely haphazard and random. I wanted it to be a pattern, but I wanted it to be not distracting from the rest and actually help the rest of the blue and the dark red there pop. And so this is actually from Eat It by Weird Al Yankovic. It's written out. I don't know if he wrote it or if the graphic designer did, but it's been doubled and mirrored and tripled and things. And so this actually says, if you look close, it says Eat It. But I just thought a nice little tribute to Weird Al, who's one of the reasons Dan and I do comedy together and are friends. Like, he's one of the things we bonded over. So that is how I made the Gornisht roll. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. Please like and subscribe, hit the bell, because I don't know, I've built a lot of stuff and drawn a lot of stuff and filmed a lot of stuff and made a lot of podcasts over the years. I'd be happy to sort of break down how I have made anything that you're curious about. And I'm still making stuff. I wanted to make sure one of my first videos is something I've made recently, so it's not like, oh, that's a cool sculpture you did 20 years ago. What I also want to leave you with is never forget that mistakes and even failures are always a stepping stone to something greater. As long as you learn a lesson from it, you'll be in good shape. Don't worry about it. Just keep trying. Don't be afraid to try. That's how we stop ourselves from doing stuff. That's how I've done it in the past, and sometimes still do. But you just push through. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. This has been Jay of All Trades, and I'm Jason Klom, telling you to keep screwing up.
Hey, it's my turn.